Some months are better than others for reading, and I am very lucky that February was a fantastic reading month for me. Let's dive into my reading journal and look at all the books I read in February, including the first book I've rated 5 stars in over a year, and get set up for March in my reading journal as well. Hi, my name's Erin, and I'm kind of a hopeless romantic, so I read a lot of romance books for the month of February to tie in with Valentine's Day. I like to use my reading journal in a few different sessions over the course of the month, so we'll be updating things a few times, and you might notice things changing like my nails and my jewelry throughout this video. It also means that I'll come back to this particular spread quite a few times, so that is the books read list for the month. I'm also going to add an entry onto my release radar here for February. At the time I added this book wasn't out yet, but I actually read this one in February too. Somehow last month when I was filling out this book's read list, I managed to miss the number 3, so I haven't actually read 7 books at this point, it's 6 and just 1 ahead. I will work that out and fix it in this video, I promise. And let's also update my book bingo. So the top left bingo there is kind of a genre overall one, and the bottom right is a romance tropes bingo. I was able to colour in the romance square for the book bingo on the top left, and also the awful X trope square for the romance bingo down below. And I'm using that empty space on either side of those bingos to keep track of which books I'm using for which squares as well. I also wanted to update my bookshelf tracker here. This one is just fun. I like to colour in the books in the same colour for the month, one that kind of corresponds to my stats tracking page for the month as well, which was pink for February, hence pink for the February books. And now let's get stuck into the first of my review spreads, and this one is going to be for Love Story by Lindsey Kelk. I'm actually squeezing this review onto a page that was left over in my January review pages section of the journal. So even though I technically finished this book in February, I don't mind having it kind of sit with the January books if that means that I am not wasting a page, you know. Lindsey Kelk is one of my favourite people to follow on the internet, both as an author and just as a human being. She's so interesting. I love that she's somebody who has many varied interests and shares all of them about herself. I feel like the internet is very much like, you can do one thing and do it well, and she's like, no, I'm going to do all the things. I'm going to also have a wrestling podcast and a beauty podcast and be an author as well. I think I've read almost all of Lindsey's back catalogue, and not every one of her books is an absolute hit for me, some of them definitely more so than others. Love Story is okay to me. I actually almost DNF'd this one pretty early on just because of the dynamic between the male and female main characters of this one. It's a rom-com. I did end up sticking it out, and I'm glad that I did, but this is not a book that I would revisit or anything. It's a single point of view contemporary romance, this one, and that's kind of one of my favourites. I quite like a single point of view. I love a dual point of view too, but sometimes it's nice not knowing what the male main character is thinking. The female main character of this story, Sophie, is a breakaway hit debut romance author, and nobody in her life knows. And she hasn't told anyone in her life because she knows her parents and her sister and lots of her friends would actually very much disapprove. This is a conversation I've seen a lot of people having outside of this book lately, which is the validity of romance as a genre and how we shouldn't have to fight for it just because it's for women, you know? It's so often dismissed as just being about smut and not being literarily valid. And this book is a love story to romance books, and I love that so much. There is so much defense of the genre in this book, which is maybe not necessary. It's kind of a preaching to the choir kind of thing, but it is really nice to hear yourself validated in the pages of a book, you know, which is the point, like it's just why we like them in the first place. It's very meta. It really is kind of a tribute to the romance genre, and there is a lot of mention of other authors who write in the genre and lots of specific scenes. Like there's a nod to the throne scene in Iron Flame, if you know, you know. That was my favourite thing about this book, and something that I felt was quite interesting and moving, but also I feel like I didn't like a single one of the characters in this book. I came around to Joe by the end. He was the male main character, but sorry, one moment, I just need to re-ink my little Tom Studio Ren pen here. Yeah, I feel like her parents, the main character's sister, her friends, the family friends around the neighborhood, all of them were quite horrible. And I just didn't feel like we reached a place by the end of the book where they had really made up for their behavior, if that makes sense. Like, I just didn't feel like I wanted to ever spend time with these people in a book ever again. For me, this one is not peak Lindsey Kelk, but I did still have a good time with it. Let's rate it on my Peach rating system, which if you would like to know more about that, there is a link to my video explaining my rating system in the description. This one I've given 16.5 out of 25, which works out to 3.3 as a star rating. I'm just going to round that up to 3.5. As always, I will try to have links in the description to as much of the stationery I'm using in this video as possible, but a couple of things are no longer available, so I'll pop a note about those in the description too. Over here on my monthly dashboard spread for my reading journal, I like to keep track of the star ratings and the corresponding number from the score. I just pop those underneath the book cover, and then I use this calendar in the middle to keep track of how long it took me to read each book, and just to make sure that I'm not kind of reading too many books at once, if that makes sense. So Sorcery and Small Magics I finished on the first day of the month, but I mostly actually read in January. And watching me fill this out, you'll very easily be able to see the date that I was working on this. It was the 10th of February, because that's where all of my lines will stop, because that's where I was up to at the time. I've been printing off my book covers kind of in batches on regular sticker paper with my home printer lately, and just cutting them out with my Cricut, and I'm finding that's helping me keep my journal a little less thick. I was using my HP Sprocket to print all of my book covers before this, and that worked really well for me, but the paper is very expensive and quite thick, and so this way I'm just trying to kind of condense a little bit, you know? I actually have a video coming for you soon about how I print my book covers and cut them with my Cricut, so keep an eye out for that. But for now, let's move on to the next review page, and this one's going to be for Sorcery and Small Magics by Maiga Doocy, which was my Paige Majors book club read for February. If you're not familiar, the Paige Majors is my very own book club that I run through the channel membership program here on YouTube. Members on the Paige Majors level have access to a special part of my private Discord, which is just for channel members. Every calendar month, we read a new book that was suggested by one of our channel members. We discuss the book throughout the month as we're reading it, and then at the end of the month we have a guided discussion over voice or video chat where we discuss the book in detail. Big shout out to Kat, who suggested Sorcery and Small Magics as a book club read. We had our chat about this one a few days ago, and everyone really enjoyed it. It's got pretty good reviews all around from the Paige Majors, so it's always a good time when everyone enjoys the book. This one is a really fun, pretty cozy fantasy. It has the coolest magic system I've come across in a long time, where you essentially need two people to form a team to operate magic. One of them has to write the spell or scribe it, and the other one actually casts it. Our main character, Leo, is paired up with his rival in class. He is learning to be a scrivener, and Grim, his rival, accidentally casts a spell on Leo that has some hilarious but also heart-wrenching consequences. There is also a tiny touch of romance in this book, but it is the slowest slow burn I have ever read, and I love a slow burn, so that makes me really happy. Something I do have to mention though, while I was setting up this page, I actually had a different book in mind, and for some reason, even though I'm writing Sorcery and Small Magics and I had put that book cover on the page, I was thinking of the Spellshop by Beth Durst when I set up this page. And so the decoration I've done here, while it does still kind of work for Sorcery and Small Magics, it's much better suited to the book that we're going to do a page for on the facing page in a minute. I don't know where my head was, you know? Like that little character sticker just to the left of the lettering there makes so much sense for the Spellshop. It doesn't really make sense for Sorcery and Small Magics at all. But stuff like spell books and the rest of the little stickers on the right, and you know, books generally, they were in school, they make some sense for the book. So I wasn't going to just stop and redo the page or like take the book cover off and redo the lettering or anything, because it worked enough that I was like, do you know what? Let's just go with it. So if you've read this book and you were watching me put this page together like, Erin, what are you doing? Did we read the same book? Sorry about that. Little bait and switch. My book club review pages always look a little bit different to the rest of my reviews because I like to include the questions that we use for the discussion on the spread. Here's my little offsider Mitsu, who I swear has also read a lot of the books that I have read, because the ones on audio, he listens to them too. Some of my page majors have expressed that they like to know the discussion questions before they read the book so that they can consider them as they read. So I've been trying to make sure that I read the book very early in the month, or potentially at the end of the previous month, so I can give them those quite far in advance. And sometimes it's really hard to come up with the discussion questions because I want them to be interesting and tailored to the book, and sometimes it's really easy, and I felt like this one was an easy book to come up with discussion questions for because it was quite complicated but also quite relatable. And when we have our meetings and discuss the book, I use the questions to kind of guide us through the discussion. So it's really useful for me to have my answers to the questions all sorted before we go into the meeting as well. I always learn so much about the books that we've read in the meetings because I'm not a super analytical person when I read. Unless something really jumps out at me, I don't tend to notice things like the pacing so much. I do notice the writing, and I'm very character driven, so that kind of thing stands out to me. And it's always really interesting to get the perspective of people who interpret things really differently to me. And sometimes the page majors will point out parallels or foreshadowing in the book that I completely missed, and I love when that happens. Very high ratings across the board here for this one, mostly 4s and 1 4.5, which means I'm giving it 4.1 stars, rounding it down to 4 just for cleanliness. I'm going to turn back to the dashboard spread as well and make sure that information is represented here too. Now that I've set up a spread for the Spellshop and then accidentally had to put a different book on it, let's do a spread that's actually for the Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst. Unlike Sorcery and Small Magics, books are actually very important to the story of the Spellshop, which is why I featured them so heavily on the previous spread. Not to worry, I have some beautiful washi tapes that I think are originally from Thumbelina Print. I actually got these ones in my Secret Santa package from one of my lovely channel members, and I used it a few pages ago on the Love Story review page as well. It's Peaches approved because she's about to come and join us and have a good time sitting on my journal. I've paired it up with some stickers from STICKII from this folk kitchen set that I thought really did kind of fit the vibe. There's a lot of cooking, kind of jam making, kitchen stuff happening in this book, so even though it's not the most cohesive, decorative review spread that I've ever done, I think it still kind of works. The vibes are there, and so is Peaches. Sometimes I like to add the title and the author's name to my review spread in pen, and sometimes I completely skip that step. It's completely arbitrary. I don't have a system for this. Peaches actually just got her little sweet little nose all over my writing and put some little bubbles kind of in the text. So in case you're wondering what that text is about, that was Peaches' contribution. I guess maybe part of whether I include the title on the page or not comes down to how much I have to say about the book and how much room I think I need for my written review part. But I don't know, sometimes I feel like I want to do one. It just depends on how much fun I want to have lettering in the moment, I guess. Sometimes I'm really keen and I want to try something out or copy the book cover, and sometimes I don't care. So this book and I went on a bit of a journey together. I actually got this one on ebook back in November, I think, and I just didn't get around to reading very much of it. I started it, I didn't get far, my library hold expired, I went back into the library queue, and when it became available again, I had to keep saying deliver later because I didn't have time. And so I ended up just doing this one on audio in the end rather than reading it with my eyeballs, because that's an easier way to consume a book for me, and I'm glad that I did. I don't feel like this one was a really big love to me. It wasn't a book that I have kept thinking about since I finished reading it, but it was enjoyable. It was very cute. I think we've established that cozy fantasy is not my favorite genre. It's not that I have any particular problems with it. I just prefer my fantasy to have higher stakes. I don't know why I enjoy being stressed while reading, but apparently I do. One thing this book had though that I absolutely love the idea of is like these ghost cats, these like spirit cats and like cloud bears and stuff. They had some really adorable mythical creatures in this world, which was really fun. And I have to say I did feel very seen by this quote that I'm adding down the bottom here. It says, "There was something so very beautiful about a notebook without a single note in it. It felt like touching pure potential." I can so relate to that. If you like a cozy fantasy with very sweet, relatable characters, small town vibes, found family, and a little touch of romance, because I always love a little touch of romance in my books, then you would probably very much enjoy this book. I do think it's really sweet. And the characters do grow and change and become better versions of themselves, and I always enjoy that in a book too. I'm the kind of person who considers a 3-star rating to be pretty good, and a book isn't kind of unenjoyable to me unless it's like 2 stars or below, maybe 2.5. So 3.7, that's like 3 3/4 stars when it's kind of rounded up for me. So as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty good. That's nearly a 4. I also have to give this book a big shout out for being my introduction to listening to audiobooks while at the gym, because that was just something that hadn't occurred to me. I was in this mindset of music only, and then one of my lovely channel members, Jen, mentioned that she listens to audiobooks at the gym, and I was like, you can do that? And then I tried it, and it was great. Deadlifting while they're riding on the dolphin things. Wouldn't have expected it, but what a great time. I mentioned Sorcery and Small Magics was the slowest of slow burns, and that meant that I could come back to my book bingo and colour that one in, because that was one of my romance tropes that I was looking for. And because I've read a few more books for the month, we can update the bookshelf tracker as well. And at this point, we're going to time travel into the future. This video is actually my first one back after taking a week and a half off and just like relaxing and reading a lot of books and doing whatever I felt like for 2 weeks, because I didn't really do that over the Christmas break. And while I was away, I went to one of my lovely stationery meetups that I adore, Stash Hangs. And at that Stash Hangs, I set up a couple of reading review pages, but didn't fill them out yet for a couple of books that I had finished. So I didn't record that process because I was on my break and I was just having a good time hanging out with my pals. But we will fill out the actual review text part together, and I will still tell you what I thought of these 2 books as well. I think having that time off and getting to just read ebooks with my eyeballs was so good for me, because that's not something I have a great deal of time to do usually in my day-to-day. And it felt really good. I had missed it. It was really nice to put my eyeballs on some words. I'm planning to try and build in some structure into my week so that I can take a weekend, even if it's just one day. So at some point in the week, it doesn't have to be the weekend, but mostly because I want to continue to be able to read more ebooks. And so I'm trying to plan that into my life. Just working on getting the February dashboard spread and the beginning of the book yearly overview trackers up to date. I'm fixing those numbers because that's been bothering me, and I think my bookshelf tracker is actually wrong now because I use this as a reference, but that's okay, it's not that important. And then we'll get stuck into those 2 reviews for the pages that I've already set up some pretty on. Further into February now and sitting down for a new session of journaling, and I've left myself not quite enough space for all my book covers on the side of the calendar here, so I'm actually going to get a little creative when I add this book cover. I'm going to add my star rating on top of some sticker paper, cut that out, and then pop it on top of the decoration so that I don't have to move anything around to be able to stamp this straight onto the page. Onward to our next book review. It has been a while since I read anything from Paige Toon, and I had missed her writing so much. I don't think I realized that until I started this book, but there's something about a Paige Toon book that simultaneously feels like a big, warm, cozy hug from someone you love very much, at the same time having your heart ripped out and thrown in a gutter and driven over by a truck. If you love a book that makes you cry, you will understand me when I say that. And it's honestly not that common an occurrence for me to cry over a book, but this one had me sobbing at the end in the epilogue. Something about Paige Toon's characters, they're always tortured, they've always been through some kind of horrible trauma, but they're still such wonderful people. I really like the people in the books I read to feel like people I'd actually want to be friends with. That is definitely the case for everyone in this book. It is beautiful. It's set in Cornwall. I really want to visit Cornwall now. That's another one of Paige Toon's signature things, is her books always take place kind of in more than one city or country, so they feel like a very emotional holiday. And this one is also based around a love triangle, which I usually would despise, but this one is just, it's done so well. To be honest, I didn't even really notice it was a love triangle until I saw it pointed out in a review, and I was like, oh, hey, yeah. You're right, it is. So I'm giving this one 4.5 stars, although I guess my brain blanked when I was colouring this in and I've coloured it in as 5. This was not the 5-star read, but it was pretty close, so just imagine that there's a half there. I'll fix that with a white paint marker off camera, but I will put the right star rating on this page, the February dashboard. It is 4.5, I promise, which is very good. And that means it probably should go into my Hall of Fame for the year, but I didn't print a book cover for it for that, so you'll have to use your imagination and just pretend. And then, of course, Onyx Storm. Never fear, I will not give you any spoilers here if you have not read this book or this series and you wish to. I make a point of not including spoilers in the voiceover for my reading journal videos in case you want to read the books that I'm talking about and haven't, but if you read the review that I write on the page, there will be spoilers in that, so please proceed with caution and look away, I guess, if you don't want to know or if you can't stop yourself reading. Yes, this is the 3rd book in that dragon trilogy that everyone keeps calling Dragon Smut that is not Dragon Smut. Why are we doing this, guys? Seriously. I really enjoyed it. I have always thought these books were heaps of fun. I continue to think they're heaps of fun. Rebecca Yarros does a really good job of keeping you entertained in the story, even when there's a lot of stuff going on and heaps of characters and lots of places to keep track of. One of my big gripes with the Kindle is that I can't zoom in on the map on my Paperwhite. It's like a 2017 or 18 Paperwhite, and I can't zoom in on the map, so I don't know where anything is. I have to look up photos if I want to see. We got a lot of questions answered in this book. We had a lot more questions raised. I feel like it was edited better than the previous. They didn't rush this one out so much. I am happy to wait. As long as the next book takes, I will read it. But I did not feel as gripped by the story in this one as I did in the previous 2. So this is the lowest rating for one of the Empyrean series books for me so far, 17 out of 25, which works out to 3.4. So we'll round it up to 3.5. It also took me quite a while to finish this one. It was basically a full month of reading, which is not abnormal for me. The previous books I think took me 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks each, but I can't lie to you. First Time Caller by BK Borison came out towards the end of my time reading Onyx Storm, and I was really tempted to jump ship and not finish Onyx Storm and just go straight on to First Time Caller and come back to Onyx Storm. I didn't, because I knew that was going to interrupt my understanding of the story, but I was tempted, and I think if you're really engrossed in a book, that probably wouldn't happen. I've got 2 books spanning the end of the month this time, Electra by Jennifer Saint, and 4 Seasons in Japan by Nick Bradley, which is our Paige Majors read for March. In the past, I haven't included the book covers of books I didn't finish on this page, but I figured since I'm printing them, I can afford to do that, and they're represented on the calendar, so why not represent them in a book cover as well? Come back for my March reading wrap-up in a month's time to find out what I thought of them. But for now, we're going to talk about First Time Caller by B.K. Borison, which is an absolute joy of a book. I loved every moment of this exquisite read. This one's a contemporary romance. It just came out in February. B.K. Borison is one of my favorite authors. Her Lovelight series is one of my favorite things to read and one of very few things that I will revisit and reread. That's just not really something that I do unless I am obsessed with a property, and I am obsessed with those books. So I think this is going to become one of those too for me. Lucy, our female main character, is a young single mum, and her daughter calls into a romance advice radio show to try and get some advice to help her mum find someone to be with and just be generally happier, which is incredibly cute. That radio show's been flagging in ratings, but Lucy's segment goes viral because so many people can relate, and so they get her on the show to try and find her a partner, someone to date. It's like a reality show on the radio. And our very fetching radio show host, Aidan Valentine, is suddenly finding that his frozen heart can feel again. But he's also trying to navigate his newfound feelings for this girl in his radio booth with trying to find her someone else to date. It's just so good. I feel like this should be true of every good romance book. It isn't always, but for me, this book felt like falling in love. And I really liked this quote. This was from one of Lucy's chapters. It's dual point of view. It says, "Sometimes a little discomfort is a good thing, a necessary thing, a thing that leads to better things." I think there's a lot of truth in that statement. It's uncomfortable, but it's good to be a little uncomfortable sometimes. If you aren't familiar with my reading journal videos from last year, I was using the Corpile rating system, which is a system very similar to my current Peach system, but it's based around like 7. And I found that using that system, I was rating books, even when I loved them, really, really harshly. I didn't get a single 5-star book for the entirety of 2024. I'm certain that if I went back through those books and re-rated them on the Peach rating system, that would no longer be the case, and that's actually why I devised my own rating system and have instated it for myself. I wanted to be less critical and just give more opportunity for myself to say I loved a book because I loved a book. I actually wrote a whole newsletter post over on my Substack about this, and if you want to check that out, there's a link in the description. It's called Notebook and Novel, and you can get downloadable, printable versions of my Peach rating stickers as a sign-up perk if you would like. This book was the easiest 5 stars I have ever given a book. I didn't even have to think about it. Incredible characters, I loved the plot, I loved the writing, everything about it had so much heart. I will reread the heck out of this book. I want everyone I know to read it. So, if you're also into contemporary romance, I could not recommend it highly enough, and I made a little book cover to put it on my Hall of Fame page. Very first one going on here. I didn't have one of these in my reading journal for last year. Well, I did. I added one at the end of the year, but it feels really fitting to have it be the first one on there. I will have to remember to put one for 7 Summers next time I'm doing some reading journal updates as well though. One more review page that we need to set up together, and this is for the last of the books that I finished for the month, and then we'll move on to stats and setting up a stats page for March as well. Very different book here, big change of pace. This one is The League of Gentlewomen Witches by India Holton, and this is the second book in her Dangerous Damsel series. I read the first one, The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels, in 2023, I think. That first one, The Wisteria Society, I recommended for a book club read that I was part of at the time, and I loved it, and another of the girls loved it, and the rest of the book club was like, the heck did I just read? I do think it's likely that India Holton's writing style isn't necessarily for everyone, but I think it's really funny. Even if you do enjoy it, I feel like you sort of need to be in the right headspace at the time to read it. You have to be in the mood. The Dangerous Damsel series is Regency fantasy romance. So think Bridgerton, but with witches and pirates that fly houses around. It's so imaginative, and I like to describe the writing as if Terry Pratchett was writing Austen. You have all the propriety of the Regency time period socializing, but with this really self-aware and hilarious bite. For instance, there is almost an only one bed trope in this book, but they get to the inn and there are actually 2 beds and they're like, well, that won't do. And so they push them together. Like, this is the kind of humor I'm talking about. This quote also gives you an idea. This quote is, "Give a girl an education and introduce her properly to the world, and 10 to 1 that she will find herself alone in an inn bedroom with a gentleman rogue." I'm not certain if this one would fall into the cozy fantasy category or not. I feel like it It probably technically does, but this one is so much more fun for me because it's so funny. I was laughing out loud constantly while listening to this one. I did this one on audiobook and the narrator was fantastic. It's amazing to me the way this one walks the line of being really funny but also very compassionate and quite touching at times. And writing's really important to me in a book, and I love when an author has a really distinct writing style like this, so India Holton, as far as I'm concerned, is incredible. She's also based in New Zealand, and we love to claim the New Zealand residents as our own as Australians, so there's that. Flat 4 stars for this one, which I think is the perfect rating. It was wonderful, and if you enjoy Regency romance, then I really think you should give these a go when you're in the mood for a bit of a giggle. I'll move that star rating over onto my dashboard page as well, and now that we have the data for all of my books that I've finished for the month of February, we can go ahead and fill out the stats page, which is always one of my favourite things to do. I don't know what it is about data, but I love it. I completed 7 books in February, which is a decent little jump up from the 4 I finished in January. It worked out to 1,181 pages and 51.52 hours of audio. On average, it took me 10 days to finish a book, thanks to Onyx Storm for pushing out my average there, and my average rating for the books was 4.04. My top read genres for February, no surprises here, romance is in the number 1 spot, followed by fantasy, contemporary, LGBTQIA+, and historical. Big shout out to Storygraph. In case you're wondering how I get these statistics, I use an app called Storygraph to log my reading as I go throughout the month, and it spits them all out for me at the end of the month. It's very easy. I have a link to my Storygraph in the description in case you'd like to be friends, and I also have a link to my Goodreads, but I have just decided to stop actively using Goodreads, so you can still follow me if you like, I just probably won't update there. Half of the books I read in February had 500 or more pages, and half of them were between 300 and 499 pages. All 7 of them were fiction books, 71% of them were audiobook, and 29% were digital. I'm a really big fan of using the library to have access to books for free, so I like to track which ones I got through the library versus books that I paid for as well. I do this just with a tag within Storygraph. It doesn't log this information for me, like it doesn't have a feature to tick library or not, but 72% of the books I read in February were through the library and 28% of them I paid for. While we're talking about trackers, let's go back to the beginning of the book too and update my book club tracker here. I talked about the page mages a little bit already. I just like to have a place to keep track of the books that we read so that they're all in one place. I can kind of use it as a reference. And I wasn't totally sure how I planned to use this spread when I first set it up, but clearly some things are going to be in the way with the way that I have established, so I'm just moving around some of the stickers so that the heading is still visible. 2 months into the journal, I think the square is working pretty well for me. I like the amount of page space, but I actually find it really difficult to fit in the frame to film, so I'm not certain how I feel about the square for that reason, but it is a big one. It's 9 by 9 inches, and the other one I have is 8 by 8, so we'll see. Just adding another BK Borison book for October, very excited about Good Spirits, and I wanted to add another series to my series tracker here, that Dangerous Damsels that I was talking about earlier. I do intend to read the 3rd one in that series pretty soon, so I thought I'd add it on here. At some point I need to go back through my previous journal and kind of migrate over my series tracker data, but that day is not today. Also getting my books read list back up to date. I've got a couple more to add there. And I'm really grateful to Past Me for adding the tabs down the side of these initial setup pages, because it has been so easy to find my way around. I'm really enjoying that. When I initially set up this bookshelf tracker, my plan was for the top 3 shelves to be for tracking the books I read in total across the months, and I am using it in that way, but the ones at the bottom were actually for tracking format, and I have not been doing that. I think I want to color code it, but because I use different pens from month to month, I thought I might just wait until I finish the journal and color those all in together in one go. For our last order of business for this video, let's get the dashboard spread for March set up so that I can start tracking books for March. This is something I do really enjoy about the Square Journal, the fact that I can fit all of this stuff on a single spread, whereas previously this was essentially a spread each definitely in the Traveler's Journal, but even kind of in the B5 that I was using this time last year, I feel like I needed more space for this stuff, whereas fitting it all on a single spread is great because that leaves me more room for review spreads, which means I may not fill up the journal by September like I did last year. I am adjusting and tweaking this spread every time I set it up though, so last time I had 4 days on the right page and 3 days on the left for the calendar, and then I sort of ran out of room for book covers over on the right, so I've adjusted it. I've moved things over a little to the left. We've got 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday of the calendar on the right side this time, and 4 on the left. I really don't need heaps of room for my stats, and I've left 2 dot grid spaces in between each one of these stamped headings for my stats this time too, so if I need to add the information underneath the heading rather than to the right of it once we add decoration, that's something I can do. I'm using a blue metallic paint marker from ArtX as my stamp ink this time, just colouring in the stamp and then putting it on the page while paint is still wet on the stamp. It takes a while, but so does stamping with an ink pad, so I'm really not mad at the process. And I really like the end result. I'm also shifting around my pie charts a little bit this time. Rather than having 4 in a horizontal row, I'm going to stack 2 of them on top of the others and make a little grid of circles. Does that make sense? 2 above, 2 below. You can see it on the screen, you know what I mean. Besides those little tweaks though, this is pretty much the same setup as in February because it worked really well for me, so I don't want to change anything unless I have a need to. Another thing I'm really enjoying about using the square journal and fitting the dashboard on a single spread is that it really takes the pressure off having to come up with a theme every month for my reading journal. So for this one, I just wanted blue and a little bit of contrast. I also wanted it to be kind of just quick and easy, so I'm sticking to washi tapes because they are, in my opinion, the most efficient way to decorate. This script washi is from Paper Monogatari. I have used a really similar one from Journal Say in the past, but this one's a little nicer quality, I think. They do the same thing. I'm going to keep my decoration to the top and bottom of the spread, much like I did for February as well. That one was a little more corner oriented, I guess. I'm layering in some wide washi tape that, again, I got in my Secret Santa from my Discord server. This one is William Morris's seaweed design. I love William Morris, so I was very excited to find this in my Secret Santa box. I believe these are from MT, like the official masking tape, original washi tape company. They're very nice quality. This blue floral tape is originally from the washi tape shop. They don't make this one anymore though. It was part of their Harmony set, which you can't get anymore. The black one with the flowers on is from Paper Monogatari, and I liked the little bit of a pop this brings to it. It still has some blue in the tape, but the darkness of the black and that little pop of orange I think really sets things off. Also, funnily enough, Anna from Journal Away, the owner of Paper Monogatari, also designed the Harmony washi tape set, so it makes sense that they look so good together because same artist. And I added some blue marble washi tape in there as well, which you may have seen before in the Reading Journal of Destiny. I knew I wanted my heading to kind of look consistent with the stamping, and I really should have probably got my silicone stamps out and stamped it bigger so it stood out, but I was lazy. They were on the other side of the room, and they don't go so well with the paint markers usually, the silicone stamps, so I just stamped it in capitals with the same tiny letter stamps, and it's very small. It is getting a bit lost there, but do you know what? I'm too lazy to do anything about it. And I also have this PET sticker tape from Korakria Crafts. This was from one of their recent subscription boxes. The theme for this one is the writing desk, so there are lots of furniture pieces and desktop items and ink splatters on this one, and I think the brown really ties into some of the secondary colours in the other tapes really well. There is also some blue in there and some black, so again we've got the contrast I was looking for. It's bringing out some of the subtler tones, and the vibes are dark academia, and I like that. I did already have the book covers for the 2 books that I have started at the beginning of March. The ones over on the right there, I had those already printed before I started this, and I can't say for sure if they influenced the theme that I came up with, but it's certainly possible. Let's have a little flip through everything that we set up together in this video. Thank you so much for coming on this February reading ride with me. I hope you got some ideas for your own maybe next TBR situation. And if you've read any of these books, I'd love to know your thoughts on them too. Make sure you leave me a comment down below. Also, since I was raving about a book that I gave an easy 5 stars to earlier, that one right there, first time caller, let me know in your comment as well, what is the easiest 5 stars you've ever given to a book and why? I feel like I'm in a really good place with reading right now. I'm really enjoying it, so I think March is going to be a good reading month for me too, but we'll have to wait and see. If you're keen to keep watching and keep talking books with me, here is a link to my reading journal playlist for this year, and underneath that is a link to my video about my Peach rating system that explains how it works in case you want to try it out for yourself.